Welcome to the Big Apple's CoRe podcast. I'm David Mock, be your host today for episode number 9. I'm here with Wayne Lambert, Director of Supplier Diversity at Turner Townsend. Looking forward to a good conversation about DE&I and supplier diversity in the real estate industry today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. Just hoping to hop right in today. Wayne has an extensive public and private sector background here. So we're going to start with a little bit about your background and just try to get a good feel for how you got to where you are today and your feelings about the industry, if that works.
Sure.
Great. So start with significant one, I guess. Considering you've been in this industry your entire career, what was something early that made you believe you were making a big impact and something that you wanted to stick with as your career?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. Thank you for that question. Definitely, and this is actually an easy one for me. It resonates. Something that resonates for me is an engagement I had with a small business early in my career with the city of New York. And at that time, I was upstate. I went upstate New York for an event. And again, I was relatively new out of college, fresh out of college, eager, sort of overzealous in some ways. And I say that in a positive way, but just eager to get involved and really meet companies, meet businesses, and really make a difference. And I came across this small business, and the business owner was interested in getting certified as a minority woman-owned business with the city of New York. Again, at that time, relatively new to the city as a full-time employee and in the role with the Department of Small Business Services, again, I just said, hey, come over to our table. I can give you all this information. And this business owner had many concerns and, hesitated, did not want to go through this process. It was a long, inundated process. And I say was because the city and the government's public sector overall has made improvements to certification processes. And, I essentially had to sell or convince this business to get certified. Long story short, ultimately I did, through back and forth conversation, explaining the benefits of the certification process, that being access to opportunities, access to networking, access to free marketing, access to a suite of services that the Department of Small Business Services and other government agencies offer for, small minority women-owned businesses across the city. And again, the business owner was still hesitant. Angelique Reed was her name. I remember it, was it yesterday, and me and Angelique were still friends today. But long story short, she ended up getting certified with the city, and she ended up winning multiple contracts with the city. Now, the reason why this stands out for me, because again, I had to sort of sell her on the importance of getting certified as a small business owner. But she was ready to close her business. And from getting certified, what happened is, again, access to opportunities through the certification process. She got certified, got a couple of contracts with the city, kept her doors open, hired employees, was able to, help to support her family as well. And that's really the point of certification. They're not set-asides, they're not handouts. They're opportunities for small minority women-owned businesses. And these programs exist, again, not because it's a way to just give, some companies dollars or not, right? It's economic development, right? And Angelique Reed, she went through that process and, lived and embodied what that means to be certified as a minority woman-owned firm. Again, I talked about the hiring, right? The fact that you're able to now bring in folks who are unemployed into the fold. Those folks have an income. They can support their families. Those folks now pay taxes. Then those taxes now help to support the communities and build up the communities that these folks live in. Minority women-owned businesses, they tend to hire folks that look like them, right? A black-owned firm will hire black individuals most oftentimes. Hispanic, women-owned, and similarly across the board. And all the groups that are covered, you think about the groups that are covered under these certification programs. Again, I mentioned a few: Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native Americans, depending on the location, LGBTQ. You have service-disabled veterans, disadvantaged businesses and small business, and a number of different designations, all of which I pulled under this term XBE. Mm-hmm. So these XBE, okay, right, to cover
we're learning
the gamut, right? Think about all the different certifications out there. And again, these groups have been marginalized over time. And, these programs, they don't just come about, just sort of by default. There are studies that demonstrate and show that certain groups are winning contracts more than others, regardless of the industry. So in short, and to be sort of direct with it, white male-owned firms tend to win majority of the contracts, and then the other groups don't win relative to their availability in the marketplace. So again, these programs are important, and I know I can go on and on about it because it's created a passion. Obviously, I'm an African American, so this impacts folks that look like me as well and live in my communities. So I feel like I am making a difference in the communities I live in, and the communities across the city, and even working here at Turner Townsend now, my current employer. We're a global firm, and we have a large national footprint as well. So we are impacting communities and doing great work. Not only bringing great projects to life, but making sure that we impact the communities that we work in. So it all ties together for me, and really makes me feel like I'm having an impact and a positive impact on those that I interact with.
Yeah. Great answer. And I imagine, like you said, that just one thing is seeing numbers on a piece of paper or increased participation or contracts awarding. Another thing is to actually see someone that you had to convince, and then the immediate transition to multiple contracts. That's great. I think that would be rewarding for anybody.
No, thank you. No,
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. You mentioned some studies about inclusion, diversity, XPE involvement, and how that's actually made material change or how changes happen over time. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So generally speaking, many or most supply diversity programs, especially on the public sector side, are based off of some type of disparity study. From that study, what happens there is you basically assess the market for availability of firms across different groups and different categories. So I mentioned earlier you have Black, Hispanic, Asian, and so on. There's an availability assessment, and you look at the availability of firms relative to the contracts that have been won by those groups over time. And those studies tend to show that white male-owned firms are winning the majority of those projects and contracts relative to their availability. So that leads to goals for different groups. And, whether it be the city of New York, city of Denver, in Los Angeles, those studies lead to these percentages goals. So, it may be X percent for Black owned firms across different industries, X percent for Asian owned firms, and so on. And that has evolved over time. In New York City, the first goal-focused program started in 2005 with Local Law 129. Local Law 129 was the first disparity study for the city's program. The program started way back when under Mayor David N. Dinkins, the former mayor, of course. And but the program wasn't a goals program at the time. When you have a disparity study, it gives the program teeth, and it can hold up in court, in a court of law, right? And that's what leads to these local laws behind the programs. Those goals have increased over time in some cases, or have been adjusted. So, for example, Native Americans was not included in the last version of the goals program for the city of New York, but has been now added back into the fold because of the availability assessment finding a lack of opportunities being allotted to that group and other groups as well. And those also lead to different capacity building initiatives, because then you can, do gap analysis and figure out, okay, you have these goals, companies still aren't winning projects. What are some of the reasons behind that? And, and I touched on this earlier, a lot of times you find that it's capacity building or capacity challenges that ultimately end up impacting some of these firms and cause them not to win opportunities, whether it be financing, to help get the project started. In the area of construction, companies lacking bonding. You need bonding and insurance and proper insurance to help, to help you be successful on a project in the event, of issues that may come about. I talk about mentorship, again, another capacity building initiative that came following a disparity study and a Supplier Diversity program. So I would say, definitely those studies give a better understanding of the marketplace. Right, and companies, private sector need to focus to create more opportunities. And those opportunities come about, again, I talked about marketing. When a company gets certified and, you find available, you see that there's availability of firms in certain spaces, you get them certified to make it sure that you can, meet your goals, right? You have to make sure they have firms to do the work. Those firms get certified oftentimes in the public sector too, in the city of New York, you have the Department of Small Business Services. Different municipalities, you have other certifying government entities. On the private sector side, you have the National Minority Supplier Development Council. They're a popular one. You have WBENC, WBENC, the Women's Business Enterprise National Committee. I always get that acronym wrong. But yes, WBENC as well, another popular one also. And, you get certified into those organizations, and it's an opportunity to network. It's an opportunity to connect with firms. All of those entities I mentioned, they have directories of certified firms. So you can go in, on the World Wide Web, search for firms, identify companies for specific opportunities, and those organizations also tend to have networking events. Right. So those networking events, I've attended NMSDC and WeBank. They both have their national events where you have, thousands of companies and businesses there that you can interact with and engage with for business opportunities. Similarly, on the public sector side, you have your Department of Small Business Services here in New York City. You have the different Chamber of Commerces across different locations. They oftentimes have directories and networking events as well, and creates opportunities to engage with different companies. Obviously, CoreNet. CoreNet is another organization where, you have the ability to meet firms, especially in the real estate industry. I've definitely met a few firms for potential partnership, and I've also recommended firms, certified MWBE firms, to join the CoreNet organization as well. So I think, a number of different avenues available, and they're right at your footstep. Oftentimes, or right at your fingerprints, right? Fingerprint. Right at, so, the opportunity is there to engage companies, and, you have, head of supplier diversities like myself and others across different organizations, whether it be public or private sector. They're all accessible. We're all accessible, and we want to connect, organizations to different firms for more opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. You need the organizational structure, but as you said, it's relationships.
Yes.
Right? It's at the end of the day, a lot of it
always.
is still, and fostering that is just an incredible, important part of this. Yeah. As we talk about that and your past public sector, what would you say the most crucial skill that you learned working in the public sector that helps you in the private sector now? Because very different ways of doing business and administration, et cetera. I imagine it was quite a transition.
Yes, definitely. And I was in the public sector going on over 15 years.
Yep.
So, and I still wear that public sector hat. I still say that I'm a civil servant at heart. I really embody that, for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. But, and there are a few, I wouldn't say there's one thing, but definitely on the public sector, you hear about the red tape, right? The administrative burdens, because, you are spending taxpayer dollars to bring these programs to life. And as such, there's accountability. Right, and with the city of New York, you have a comptroller, you have different mayor's offices that monitor the spend, in New York City as an example, right? But even the other municipalities, they have similar setups where there's some level of accountability. So you can't just spend freely, where you have to be mindful of the dollars, the programs, your constituents. And it takes a longer time. You have to oftentimes go through legislative processes to create programs. So MWBE programs, they come about through legislative processes. And I'll keep using New York City as an example. Obviously, that's the market I know the most. In New York City, you have to go through New York State legislation to get and that sets precedents for the laws, local laws that come about here in the city. So that takes a longer time. You have to go through voting processes, and on the private sector side, things move a lot quicker. And which is good, right? Good, and I won't say bad, but definitely good, right? Because things can happen, quickly. You have an idea, you can bring it to life more quickly, and resources are readily available, and generally speaking. And with the case, also from the public sector side, you often have to deal with different community boards and different community advocates as well, right? Who will chime in because they're advocating for their constituents. In the case on the private sector, you have a board that you have to be mindful of, and you're worried about the bottom line. In my previous role, I wasn't worried about bottom line. It was always, we need a program, we can bring it to life, but we have to go through a longer process. Make sure we go through all the checks and balances and that we're in compliance with all the rules and the legal sort of implications of these programs that we bring to life. Again, private sector side, I've realized that, you want something done, you have an idea, you do have to demonstrate it, through data, and you do have to demonstrate that these programs are necessary to help the company make money, right, at the end of the day. But, the business imperative is one key side of it, right? But still, the fact that we're able to do things quicker, we're able to have a greater impact much sooner than on the public sector side, I believe, in some cases.
Yeah, no, I sounds great. Okay. It must be very refreshing.
Yes.
You want community involvement, and you want a lot of different people to speak on things, but just the time that can go along with city approval processes. And I formerly worked in a municipality, dealing with municipality rather, and so I can understand that certainly. Sort of one question that I had in general, with specifically some of your experience working with the mayor's office in the city, is that the reality is that we're not in a very diverse industry, and certainly not historically been. And even with recent measures, there's still a lot of pushback in the real estate industry because of those established firms. What do you think is the biggest pushback, even when you have governmental support, when you have support from the city to do this, where there's still not the right amount of inclusion in what we want coming up? Like, what's just the biggest, pain points in the industry to get that involvement?
Sure. I would say, for minority and women-owned businesses, typically you'll find, there's usually a lack of access to resources, right, or capital in many cases. And that's not for all companies, of course, but generally speaking. And, because of that, it creates sort of bottlenecks for these firms, right? You don't have the right funding or the right backing. You can't, pursue certain opportunities, right? Because you don't have, you don't have the financial flexibility like some of the larger firms or the more established companies that have been out there that tend to not be minority and women-owned businesses or diverse businesses or XBEs. And the relationships, right, that have been built and created over time with these non-XBE firms and non-XBE organizations, right? You have people get comfortable, right? You get comfortable with the companies or businesses that you work with, right? Just like, I'm sure in our personal life we have that plumber, electrician, someone that we're most comfortable with. They may not give us the best price, but we know them. We feel comfortable with their work. We've seen their work, right? And it, sort of creates that sort of block, and we don't allow ourselves to try a new business or look to create new opportunities elsewhere. Similarly, you'll find in the real estate industry, I think it's the same sort of concern, that sort of lack of engagement with diverse companies, and also there's some ignorance involved, right? And I say that in a sense where people don't realize that when you have diverse engagement, right, it actually benefits the business. So there's a business imperative for doing that, and so many studies show that when you have diverse ideas, right, it leads to better, more innovative ideas that come out of it. And you have more collaboration, right? Because there's more folks involved, there's more networking that takes place through that process. So I think, again, we have that sort of comfort level, and we have to break that mold and understand that, yes, this could be a disruptor for our normal business process, whatever industry you're in, right? But it's imperative that we do so because it's going to help us make more money. Right, and again, in terms of business, that's dollars and cents, right?
Yeah,
dollars and cents. So I'm definitely mindful of that, and I think, and again, I'm gonna. Definitely the real estate industry definitely has a focus in this area because they understand that, that is lacking, right? It's an industry that is lacking in this space. And I think that more engagement will help to break some of those, historical barricades, if you will, for XBE firms.
Yeah, that's great. It just seems like, there's a lot of inertia on that, and it might be comfortable, but just because you're doing the same thing over, if it works, you don't know if it could be better. Even with more diverse forces and XBE involvement. That's great. But you brought up money, and speaking of that transition, now you are in the private sector. So as you've made that transition, what would you say the biggest learning experience for you so far with the change to Turner?
So one that I mentioned earlier, just the way things operate internally, they just move a little faster, right? And so that's definitely a plus. Dealing with a global firm, right? It is a broader network and a broader reach. And one difference for me, again, being mainly focused in the New York City market in my public sector career, is that now working for a global firm and a firm again that has that national footprint, you have to understand different markets. Right, and I think the same, whether it's real estate, any industry, you have to understand the different markets. You have to understand the culture, right? Every state has its own culture. Every county has its own culture. You have to be mindful of
Yeah.
that, right? Because if you don't understand and have that appreciation, the folks there won't accept you, right? They won't want to do business with you, essentially. So you have to sort of have that respect and that appreciation for the differences across different groups. So again, it's looking at different ethnic groups and gender mixed together and what have you, but it's also just looking in the different locations and seeing, just the way folks go about, their daily lives and their daily routines, and, again, respecting that. Not saying, oh, I'm the New York City boy coming in to bring in my New York City ways, with my Yankee hat on, so, you have to sort of be mindful of that. So that's what I think is a challenge and an opportunity, right? Because, again, it allows you to learn about different cultures, learn about different people, understand how different folks do business, and then it broadens your horizons, right? And now now you have more, you can bring more value to your company. In this case, the company's Turner Townsend I'm with me. It allows me to bring more value to the company and broaden our reach as a project management firm.
Yeah, no, that's great. I can't imagine the challenge because, as you mentioned, there is just, there's diversity in region and people everywhere, and trying to. I think when we were speaking earlier, you said you were just in Florida,
Yes.
which I imagine is a completely different, just atmosphere than is in New York City.
Right.
But still, great opportunity for more inclusion as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. And I've definitely had to, sort of humble myself.
Okay.
Right, I'm comfortable saying that, humble in the sense of like, feeling like, hey, I'm from a big market.
Right.
I understand how supplier diversity works everywhere, but yeah, in actuality, that's not the case. So again, that appreciation I think is important for anyone in this space, in the supplier diversity world. And I think many folks that you talk to, they'll have similar sentiments. And what I'll even add there is think about diversity on a global scale, right? It gets even more complicated, right? And trying to figure out how different markets, different governments operate, because even how the government operates, they then create their laws and that may be different than the laws that we have here in the U.S. And we have to be, mindful of that, because you can't do business if you don't understand the rules of the game in different locations. And similarly, again, that culture difference, right? It's probably more of a culture shock when you go overseas. Right?
I would imagine international is,
yeah. But they also have the supply diversity initiatives. So when I say they, so I'll reference like Canada, for example. Supply diversity is something different there than here in the U.S. They're more, the concern is around the indigenous population and the Aboriginal population. In the continent of Africa, obviously a heavy focus on Africans, Black Africans getting opportunities in the UK. Right, it's about small, medium enterprises, not necessarily about Black, Hispanic, Asian. So different focuses, which has allowed me to really think more outside the box and how I go about my job.
Absolutely fascinating. I just there's Orlando, and then there's the whole world.
Right.
Too. Well, you mentioned being humble, but let's give you an opportunity maybe to puff your feathers a little bit. What would you say you're most proud of, or where you've been able to make an immediate impact at Turner and Townsend that you really would like to just tell us about?
Sure. What can I say? I would say just the fact that the role that I'm in, is a new role for the company. I think sharing information about supplier diversity and supplier diversity programs, and getting to an organization where, again, understanding the importance and the need for this role, not only for the business purposes of it, but just because it's the right thing to do, right? We want to make sure that as a company, we embody, all the wording behind our purpose, values, and vision, that they permeate through our actions, right? In business, you hear about putting your money where your mouth is. Turner Townsend obviously did that by committing resources to this role and continuing to put resources into this role. So I think just, a lot of it too is coming in, part of the plan and strategy is, educating folks, right? And some folks may say, hey, what is supply diversity, right? And that's a fair question, because not everyone, if you don't work in that space, you don't have the full appreciation for all the intricacies involved in, bringing forth a robust supply diversity program and supply diversity initiatives. So I think, the sort of educating side of it, being a resource internally. So when we go after opportunities and we see XBE goals, we know how to approach them, how to meet them, how to exceed them, and how to show that we're fully committed to this effort. So I would say there, just because it's a large company and it's a global company, and just being able to add value and add a different lens to the business, again from a supply diversity standpoint.
Great, great. All right. Well, we talked about your challenges on the public sector earlier. Maybe let's shift to, and we talked about the community boards and delays with government and needing states sign off. How about specific challenges on the private sector? You mentioned it's faster, but there's probably a different set of challenges even at Turner and Townsend. So can you talk about that with the
Sure.
diversity initiatives in the
Sure.
private sector?
Definitely, definitely private sector, because things move so fast, right? It sort of conflicts with how supply diversity, the real sort of, when you want to take an in-depth approach to supply diversity, it takes time, right? You have to play the long game. And, definitely the leadership at Turner and Townsend had a great appreciation for that, and understand that we have to strategize here in order to bring this to life in the way that we want to see it, right? In its fullness. And, because things move so fast, you don't have time to always call 20 companies for a potential opportunity, right? You may have to call 3 or 4, right? Where on the public sector side, as part of the process, you make sure to reach out to as many companies as possible, and of course there's time constraints there, but on the private sector side, folks are like, hey, we need this information now. And not just this is any private sector firm. We need this now. We need to make a move on this proposal now. And when you're calling a small business firm, they often, again, as I mentioned earlier, don't always have as many resources, but you want to give them opportunities. So they may not have the ability to respond to a solicitation as quickly as some of the larger firms, right? Because the person who's taking the hammer and hitting the nail is also doing all the finance paperwork, doing the taxes, making sure that there are supplies. So because of that constraint on those few individuals, right, it makes it harder to really engage companies in the way that we would want to, given the fact that you have to sort of get back so quickly with information. And as a best practice, it's typically mentioned that when you're reaching out to diverse firms, you want to give them an opportunity to respond. You want to give them time so they're not rushing, so you're not setting them up to fail. And oftentimes that happens, and then that sort of creates a negative stigma around diverse companies.
Yeah. Oh, makes sense. Great answer again. So it's not just Turner, right? There's other industries in the private sector that have initiative on the XBE side in diversity relations. How do you think that the trends in the supply diversity matches up with those other organizations' goals and trends there?
So I would think about it. I think about it from the engagement standpoint. I feel like what I've been seeing is that there's a lot of community engagement, community involvement, right? And that's critical. Especially in real estate. Definitely, that's a critical component, right? You have developers who want to come into a community, build up in a community, but nonetheless there are businesses that exist. There are people that already exist, right? And sometimes you're displacing them in some way, shape, or form, or impacting that community in some way, shape, or form. But when you have community involvement, right, then the folks feel like they are also putting their imprint. They're having their imprint on what's happening in their communities, in the developments, and making sure that you're not just coming in here to just put this building up, just gonna just make money, right? But you're being mindful. Maybe you're creating jobs in the community, right? Maybe you're maybe with the logistics around putting a building, right? You're being mindful of all the constituents in the area and the different stakeholders are involved, how it impacts the businesses. Those businesses, once they see that you're coming in there and you actually care about, then they're more willing to say, okay, this is going to be a hindrance for a moment, but ultimately this will have a positive impact, on the folks that live here. I'll also say, also from a standpoint of, again, I mentioned the engagement, but just the back and forth, it creates that dialogue, right, that may not have existed before. So I see that as a trend. People realizing that, in companies, organizations realizing that you have to communicate, you have to have that back and forth, engage. Because without that, again, you're not going to get buy-in, and you're always going to probably get pushback, which will slow down the project, and just have a negative impact, on the ability to see something through to its end.
Great. And then finally, for just this section, are there any major accomplishments accomplishments or initiatives that you're working on right now that you'd like to share with us and our podcast listeners right now? I mean,
Sure.
Again, buff your feathers,
Sure. And these are some of the things that are, not fully in place, but some things that, I think. Well, let me take it back. I'm going to jump to my public sector experience for a moment. And one of my big accomplishments in my last role with the City of New York as the Chief Diversity Officer with New York City Department of Design and Construction was creating the first city agency construction mentorship program. And that was something that I talked about legislation, right? You have to go through a bunch of legislative loops in order to get such a program. And there are programs in the city that already exist. The MTA has a great program led by Mike Garner there. He's he's the Chief Diversity Officer there and a firm advocate and someone who had an impact in the city getting their first mentorship program. I think of Suzanne Vera from the School Construction Authority. Also launched a mentoring program, and the New York City DDC. We use those programs and help to create our program here. And I say our because I still wear that civil service hat, and so I'm always going to bleed New York City colors.
Love it.
Always. So definitely, I think that's been one of my great accomplishments. The fact that I helped to get over $20 billion to MWBEs, starting from the previous administration. One of the goals was to get to $25 billion by 2025. And before I left the city, we were way ahead of schedule there. By the time it was this was a goal that was $16 billion. Then because the city was performing so well, it went to $20 billion. The goal kept moving up because we kept getting more and more dollars to MWBE firms across the city. We also helped the Department of Education launch its Supplier Diversity initiative, and they didn't have one at the time, and I was heavily involved there. Same thing with the Health and Hospital Corporation, HHC. So a number of different entities and authorities throughout the city, I was able to come in and help, lay the groundwork for their Supplier Diversity programs. So something I'm definitely very proud of. Again, the mentorship program I mentioned that initially, that's big because for small businesses and minority-owned firms, women-owned firms as well, mentorship is a great way to increase capacity. I'm looking to do something similar here at Turner Townsend, and we are starting to lay the groundwork for a mentoring program as well. So, knock on something, knock on wood, knock on concrete, whatever it is, we're going to bring this to life because we understand, again, the importance of building up some of our, quote unquote, smaller partners so they can become, better partners and better business partners rather. And just, again, do our part to make sure that we're helping companies build and grow.
Great. What impressive track record.
Thank you.
Thank you. And really has been a great conversation, but we do like to have a little fun at the end, if that's okay.
Fun is always good.
So, appreciate really educational for me and happy to do this, but we're going to get into a segment we call the New York Minute.
Okay.
All right, so it's going to be rapid fire questions. We're going to try to go a minute. Occasionally it goes over. We're not real sticklers, but sound good?
Okay, yes, let's do it.
All right, okay. Favorite way to get around the city?
Train,
absolutely. All right. Favorite lunch spot?
I don't have one, but I'm a West Indian guy.
Okay.
My family's from the island of Jamaica, so anywhere I can get a good porridge, some ackee and saltfish with some fried dumplings, that checks off the box for me.
Awesome. Favorite after work hangout?
My after work hangout is with my daughter.
Okay.
Pick her up from school. We do homework. We laugh, we have fun, we learn. And she still asks me to sing her songs to go to bed. So yeah, that's my favorite hangout.
Oh, everybody else says bars. This is a heartwarming answer. How about an interesting fact about yourself that people might not originally think?
In my previous life, I used to be a DJ.
Okay.
I used to be a DJ.
What kind of music?
On the ones and twos. Reggae, hip hop, R&B. A little bit of everything.
Okay.
But mainly reggae, hip hop, R&B.
Awesome. An interesting thing that sparked your interest in industry news recently. Something you saw.
I would say, not a fun topic, but we're seeing some folks would like to remove African American history out of American history studies. So something that's been concerning for me, and that rhetoric sort of, because of the importance of the diversity of folks in the U.S. here, right? This sort of hits me in a bad way, right? But hopefully we don't take it. Hopefully we can stop that, right? And we make sure that African American history is a part of American history.
Important. And then finally, if you can go back and tell your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say to start my own business.
Okay.
And really think about, building generational wealth and entrepreneurship. I think that is a key avenue for wealth building, of course, but also to help to build up communities. Again, I talk about the economic development aspect. Business owners have that ability to have that impact. So I would definitely say, start my own business.
Great. All right, well, that's going to do it for us, but thank you so much. It was enjoyable, educational, entertaining. Hope you enjoyed yourself as well. Thanks very much, Wayne.
Thank you, David. Definitely appreciate the time being here.
All right, absolutely. That'll do it for the Big Apple's CoRe podcast. Thanks, everybody.